Most modern tokusatsu fans, at least the ones in the circles I travel in, tend to keep up with Superhero Time, the hour block of Super Sentai and Kamen Rider that Toei puts on TV Asahi every week. And a lot of people will get into it and have a couple years where they're kind of feeling things out and then eventually settle into it and have a few shows from around that period where they've just settled in and they're really feeling things. Those shows have a special place in their heart and they really resonate with them, and they tend to get a bit defensive when people start picking them apart. For me, one such show is this week's video topic, Kamen Rider Drive. Hey everybody, what's going on? I'm the Vacuuminator, and this is another one of my silly little videos where I talk about silly little superheroes who fight with silly little toys, and we all ascribe a lot greater meaning to. And I think Kamen Rider Drive is a great example of such a show, because it's one that I have seen a lot of different and very varied discussions about through the years. Because I can remember back when the show was about to start up, as Kamen Rider Gaim was ending, and a lot of people seemed kind of tentatively excited about it, because it seemed like a crazy departure from everything Kamen Rider had been up to that point, in that it was a Kamen Rider who had car-based powers, and Kamen Riders almost always ride motorcycles. So, ooh, isn't that wacky? Even though fucking RX did that back in the 90s? And in actuality, a lot of people were let down and dropped off during the early stages of the show because it was kind of a back-to-basics series. It went back to the old two-part format that Heisei had done for most of its length, and Gaim had been so engaging for shattering. But myself and a lot of others did still stick through that period, and when Drive's plot started kicking up after the first 15 or so episodes, it became a really great show that a lot of us enjoyed watching and talking about. And that's how it kind of was cemented in my mind for years after that, as like, not the best Toku show ever, but a really solid one that's worth most people's time. That is until the last year or so, where I've seen a lot of people kind of deriding it and writing it off as a boring back-to-basics series that stars a very incompetent jackbooted thug cop who's supported by a bunch of other jackbooted thug cops, because this is America in 2023 and all cops are bastards. And while I do understand and agree with the political side of that statement, I don't really think it's fair to apply it to a Japanese show from 2014, especially because a lot of the show is about the main character, Tomari Shinosuke, Kamen Rider Drive, growing out of his incompetence. During the inciting incident of the series, he fucks up because of this big crazy sci-fi thing that's happening with the world and accidentally injures his partner, and ends up blaming himself for it for months after that, until during the early episodes of the series, his partner forgives him and tells him not to blame himself, that it could have happened to anybody during that incident. And from that point on, he starts trying to find a sort of balance between the character he had been at the start of the show, going, oh, I can't think about things too much, or I might overthink it and fuck up again, and I have to just leap without looking, and more so finding the balance, trying to be able to read a full situation, get everyone's side of the story, and then acting at just the right time. In my opinion, Shinosuke's arc is very much about finding the balance between looking and leaping, between action and consideration, and also the balance between great and terrible suits. Seriously, I know this is a bit of a tangent, but it's really amazing to me how Drive has no okay suits. Like, you either have Type Speed and all its bajillion variants, which are fucking amazing every time, or you have abominations like Type Technic and Type Formula, which should never be used in Kamen Rider ever again. Just completely forget and like retcon out that he has those forms. Only focus on Speed, Wild, and Trideron. Those are the good ones. And like the special ones too. I love Type High Speed. That special was hilarious. This also really comes to light in the part of the show in the middle where his identity as Kamen Rider Drive gets exposed to the public, and the top brass of the Japanese Metropolitan Police start interfering in his doings, and we discover a whole corruption plot that dates back to his father's murder, which originally inspired him to become a cop. And by solving that case and cutting out the corruption in the system, he is able to sort of actualize and become the true main hero he was always meant to be for the rest of the series. I know a lot of people see it as really unfortunate that it's only really that chunk of the show where he gets a ton of interesting development and pathos, but I think it works in that he spends a lot of the early part of the series just kind of being main character man going through the motions, has a huge arc of change in the middle, and then is a very inspiring and admirable main character man on the level of like a Showa writer for the back half of the show. Also, on the subject of that middle corruption arc, I've seen a lot of people in recent years deriding that part specifically, saying that like it's a really big problem with the show, that they just get rid of a couple of bad eggs in the police department and then there's no problems after that, that's totally unrealistic because police departments in the real world have corruption going on at all levels all the time because the world is horrible. And I'm just like, yeah, of course it's that way in the show. Of course that's what they do. Because it's fiction. Have you ever looked at fiction before? Like, do I need to do that whole G.I. Joe video over again and remind you all that fiction can be about holding a mirror up to the world and saying, this is what you could be if you stepped up and were as good as you claim to be? Don't you think that's what's going on here? Don't you think that's part of the lesson of the show? Don't you think that's a lesson that Kamen Rider does quite often, actually? I mean, come on. Do you really think there's no Nazis left in the world after Hongo and Ichimonji kicked the crap out of Shocker way back in the 1970s? Fuck no! And let me just be clear here. I'm not saying you shouldn't tell kids about police corruption in the real world and make sure they understand how to navigate problems like that. I'm just saying this is a silly show about selling toys to kids via a colorful superhero that fights monsters and robots. It doesn't have to go that deep or that hard unless it's like a hard R installment for adults on a streaming service. What I'm trying to say is, don't expect Drive to have Black Sun's level of gritty, realistic, real-world problems. They're two very different beasts, even though they're both a part of the same franchise. And yes, I do plan to do a Black Sun video one day, but I need to do a hell of a lot more research on it first. But of course, Shinosuke isn't the only character in Drive. He also has a large supporting cast of people in the same police unit as him, who are all very colorful and fun characters who get minor arcs throughout the show about things like growing out of skepticism, learning to live with a newer generation, and learning to accept love for the very flawed and real thing that it can be, and reminding the world that anime is kinda awesome if you have nothing else going on in your life, I guess. But the main thing to really talk about are the other writers in the show. Go Shinjiyama, aka Kamen Rider Mach, and Chase, aka Kamen Rider Chase, who are a very interesting dual act that a lot of people like to dig into as the real stars of the show, because, well, they're much younger and much prettier than Shinosuke's actor, and they have a lot of angst associated with their character, because Go has a lot of daddy issues, and Chase is a robot who wants to be human, and as I've said before, I love that storytelling trope, and most people find it very engaging. And this place is no exception, because Chase is one of the few repentant members we see of the villainous forces in Drive throughout the series, the Roidmudes. And really, he was good all along and had just been captured and brainwashed during the series' inciting incident. Spoilers for the show, by the way. But once Chase comes out of his fog and realizes that he is a good boy and always has been, and becomes Kamen Rider Chaser instead of Kamen Rider Proto Drive, he starts trying to empathize with the other humans around him, and that includes being generally nice to Kamen Rider Mach, the secondary rider, who fucking hates him because he hates all Roidmudes, because Roidmudes are evil robots trying to take over the world that were created by his dad. And Go never really knew his dad as a kid, and only found out as an adult that his dad did this, and was also just like a horrible sadistic bastard who didn't even really seem to love Go's mom, and didn't give a shit about his kids. We see Banno in several flashbacks basically being a psychotic, abusive piece of shit, and then he actually becomes one of the main villains of the show during the latter half, and continues to be a psychotic, abusive piece of shit towards Go, and constantly threatens to be to his daughter, Kiriko, but because she's a lady and not a Kamen Rider, we can't really do much violent stuff to her because Japan's progressive. Now, a lot of people tend to interpret this odd couple relationship that Go and Chase have throughout the series as a racism allegory because, well, Go hates all Roidmudes, ergo he hates their entire race, and he's hating Chase even though Chase has no history of acting like most Roidmudes do willingly, so ergo Go is racist. And while I can see how one would get led to that interpretation, as I can see how idiot pilots could be led to flying over me during my videos, I also really disagree with it upon further examination for this video, because this has been something that's been percolating in my head for years about, like, was that a racism allegory? Is that a thing? Is that a strong enough thing in Japan that they'd have put that in a kid's show like that? And I have to say, I kind of don't think it is now, because, like, when you take the fact that Go has this relationship with Chase because of his relationship with his father and the way his father's megalomaniacism has affected the entire world, and also everything going on with Shinosuke and the fact that several other characters in the show have backstories relating to personal trauma, like the mentor figure being a guy who had to put a brain in his belt because the dude he worked with took their invention, used it for evil, and then that invention revolted and decided to destroy all humans, starting with them because of it. And you can see that the show's much less about racism and much more about shared trauma. Think about it. Go isn't really projecting his perception of what a Roidmude is and does onto Chase when he's yelling at him and calling him a stupid machine and giving him weird looks and telling him to stay away from his sister. He's projecting what the Roidmudes did as an extension of his father's evil and cruelness onto Chase. He's seeing Chase as just another instrument of his father being a bad person, and he doesn't want that to hurt him or anyone he cares about anymore. So he's just instinctively, knee-jerkingly reacting and saying, "No, get the fuck out of here, you're a fucking Roidmude. All these fucking Roidmudes that my dad made got us in this situation. We don't need your help. You're just gonna betray us at some point, because that's what happened to me. I thought my dad was a good guy, and then suddenly when I became an adult, I learned that he was a piece of shit, and that I had to dedicate my life to fighting his creations, and everything has fucking sucked since then." And it's only through being forced to spend time with Chase at various points throughout the series while working with him and the rest of the SCU that he learns that Chase isn't actually all that bad of a guy, that he's actually pretty divorced from who his dad was as a person, and that mostly he's just a chill guy who wants to help out with the pursuit of justice that the rest of the main characters are on. And he eventually does accept that with Chase, but it unfortunately ends up being too little too late, as Chase is destroyed during the final fight with Banno as Gold Drive, and Go ends up using Chase's weapon to destroy the last remnants of his father's influence on the world in probably one of the most cathartic scenes I've ever seen in Kamen Rider. Genuinely, the first time I watched that, I stood up out of my chair, fist bumped, and cheered, because Banno had been such a massive shithead to his kids and everyone else in the show up until then, also leveling abuse back on the other main Roid Mutes we had been following and slowly growing in sympatheticism to up till that point, that seeing him get his just desserts was extremely satisfying. Again, I'm not saying the take of it being a racism thing is inherently wrong. I just tend to view it in a much more positive light of it fits more into the greater theme of the series of growing past your trauma. I think that's what the whole show is about, and that's why, even though a lot of people, including myself at the time, scratched our heads at it, at the end of the show, Krim locks himself and all the drive gear away so that nobody can ever use it again. So that all these instruments of war that him and Banno made to fight each other and the Roid Mutes and try and resolve this whole bullshit conflict they had are just gone now. That they're not going to fuck up anyone else's life. And the ending is a big montage of this person went on to do this thing, this person went on to do that thing, like in a based on a true story movie. I think Drive is really trying to send the message of, though it can be long, hard, and painful as a journey sometimes, it's worth growing past your traumas so that you can go on to become a better, happier person and do other things with your life. Whether that thing be getting married, moving forward in your career, or trying to go on a new journey of finding a way to bring back your new best friend from the dead, it's all worth doing. Life is worth living. That's the core message of all of Kamen Rider. Pursuing justice and standing against evil, whatever form it takes, that's something you gotta do. And that's what I think Drive is all about, and that's why I think Drive is a good show. It has some weak points in there, don't get me wrong, but it's still worth everybody's time. So, if you haven't already, go check it out, because on the Vacuuminator, I said so. Just like I'm saying to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, engage with the algorithm, help me get to my goal of 2,500. I forget what it even is at this point, because I said it the first time like a month ago, subscribers by the end of the year, and to $100 on Patreon by the end of the year, because I have a Patreon. It's $1 a month. You get videos early, you get your name in the end credits, you get a monthly behind-the-scenes podcast. It's a good time, and it's a cheap time, so I think it's worth your time. Just like I think I'll never fail until I stop trying, because it's always going to be worth trying to get y'all to realize that shows you think aren't that great because of your own cultural baggage are actually pretty good and worth checking out. So, until next time.